Thank you. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. I feel fantastic, and I want all of you to feel as good as I do at age 76. It is a miracle that we live in a time that I could have been born with many, many health problems, running high fevers, stuttering, cross-eyed, unable to be coordinated, unable to participate in sports, heart problems, total lack of stomach acid. I had the lowest levels of magnesium tested on humans, so I had the highest levels of mercury in air, so I had a few problems. And at age 76, to feel fantastic is what I want to help all of you do. Now, my title of my talk today, Stemming the Tide of Cancer, I've had such wonderful success in treating heart disease since my heart failed at age 29 that I really have gotten kind of bored with heart disease since I developed the concept that you could find the right supplements to take, and I call it oral chelation, but it's much more complicated. We spent about $10 million figuring out EDTA can make heparin work by mouth, so I stopped the clots that kill people. So since heart disease became kind of easy to treat, and Dr. Sinatra, my friend with metabolic cardiology, we've been able to even cancel heart transplants, even on children, I kind of decided to move into the cancer field because I see it as the next challenge. So when we move into this field of cancer, the exciting news is that you will be able to learn that Dr. Kobayashi taught us how in Tokyo to follow 10,000 patients 10 years using a blood test that told you how much cancer you have. And this is all on my website, Gordon Research, and when I'm done speaking, I'll have all of you join at no charge my School of Advanced Medicine with 3,000 other of our colleagues, where I teach you these little tricks. I want to make sure that I get you to understand there's a reason that we're all sitting here not feeling as good as we could because the Earth's magnetic field is collapsing, according to NASA. And when you have the researchers telling you that about 250 million years ago, when we had the dinosaurs really doing pretty well, we had about 30 Gauss. Today, the experts tell you that most of the Earth contains only about 0.3 Gauss. And of course, at zero, you'll be like Mars, you'll be a dead planet. So we have a new thing to add to our consciousness, since I have spent so much time learning what nutrients to take in and how to get the bad stuff out. And Dr. Kobayashi showed us that we didn't need a drug to keep people cancer-free. What we needed was to have people motivated sufficiently so that they would do the simple things that all of you really talk about: daily detoxification, adding far infrared saunas when you need to, getting immune support, lowering stress, adding exercise, and simplifying the diet and getting off the foods we're allergic to. I put all of that into an acronym called Fight for Your Health. And my website, which has about 10,000 pages, and then there's beyond my website, there's the private membership website called FACT, which I'll have all of you pick up a piece of paper to learn how to join at no cost. So you can learn what your colleagues around the world are doing with cancer or heart disease or autism or Alzheimer's, because there's exciting things going on. But as we will see from this slide, we can take and have the ability. I'm going to have to get my pointer because I'm not seeing which of these is the right button for the pointer. I would like to point out that in a magnetic field, things like frequencies, and everything turns out to be a frequency when you get into the field of quantum mechanics. You'll start to be able to understand this sentence here, that homeopathic remedies are frequencies, because everything really does work on a string theory. So when you move into string theory, when you move into this new field of thinking, you can really have a much more powerful effect when you're treating with homeopathics or even with a laser, because the major benefit is in a magnetic field. The laser is going to virtually go through. So last night, at the booth 211, where I learned at the last conference of IFIM about pulsed electromagnetic field therapy, we took a lady that was walking by that was in total pain for several months she's been unable to use her right shoulder, and in one treatment simply had her sitting there with a big happy smile on her face with that shoulder back. And she's been a massage therapist, and she's tried everything, and she's talked to many people. So there's something going on when we learn about this magnetism. And so the Earth's magnetosphere, the big question is, right now, you have the privilege of living on Earth at a time of Earth changes. And it appears that it's very likely that about 730 million years ago, the South Pole was the North Pole. And right now, we find that there's some interesting changes going on, and the magnetism is really important in protecting the Earth, but it's the only way you can raise ATP levels in every cell in your body so that all of our nutrients can work and our cells can push out these toxins that we all agree we're loaded with. Now, you've been hearing a lot about dead birds falling to the ground, and we know that they all navigate by magnetism. And there's been some changes going so that in Tampa they had to renumber the runway because the North Pole has moved about 60 miles. And that's because we're going through a time of change. And no one's suggesting that the North Pole will be South Pole in your or my lifetime. But it's very clear when NASA tells you that the collapse of the Earth's electromagnetic field is one of the things that we're facing, then we have to plug that in. My friend Dr. Sinatra is making people aware of the physics of health. And the physics of health means that we'll have to go back and look at what does electricity do, what does magnetism do, how important is pH? Or when you put magnetism into the body, you raise ATP and you make the cells alkaline again, so they operate much more efficiently. And so there's a lot to these new findings that we don't get grounded anymore. We don't walk on the wet grass and change things. And there is going to be more and more interest because now we have even PubMed showing that prolonged weakening of the geomagnetic field is directly leading to changes in our body and delaying the ability of our thymus to mature and also lowering the effectiveness of the immune system. So it's really fascinating to find that the geomagnetic field that we operate on is terribly important about the release of macrophage nitric oxide. So all of the things that we learn at our conferences, we now have to add physics to our consciousness. So you've all heard today about the problem of environmental cancer risk, and we know this is real, and we know these chemicals are in everybody, and we know about where they're coming from, and we know government can't change it. It's too big a problem, so we're going to have to protect ourselves and our patients. So we have this ridiculous nonsense going on that people are being told erroneous information. The people that we treated in the study in Tokyo, many of them had familial gastric carcinoma and they carried the gene for it, and we didn't have to take the stomach out. This is all nonsense that because you're BRCA1 or BRCA2 you need to take out the ovaries and breasts. This is not paying attention to the truth as is being written very well by lots of experts, that the gene doesn't express when you optimize the environment. Now, optimize the environment does require the patient being motivated, which is where the ability of new cancer tests will be very helpful in your practices as you start to incorporate early screening tests for cancer before it's the lump bump stage, as you will see. So the association about this and taking off the breast is not the answer. Johnson & Johnson is soon going to be releasing this test. And they are doing this test at Sloan Kettering, and they're doing it at Mass General. This test picks up 1 cell out of 1 billion in your peripheral blood. So that cell then tells you truth, because there's so much lying going on in the field of cancer therapy. I'm upset, and this report will tell you very simply that they are actually able now to do this test, and they will, as I say, the chief of Mass General, this test is allowing them to find that when you've been told that the patient's prostate cancer is only in the prostate, do you all believe that? No. Cancer is a systemic disease. And when they released in the press release that 67% of the men who'd been told the cancer was just in the prostate, so let's radiate it, let's cut it out, you're going to be fine. What nonsense. It is real clear that 67% of those patients who were told that it was limited to their prostate, it was in their peripheral blood. So as we start to move our consciousness into the idea then about cancer in a different sense, I have saved on my website, and when you get my handout so that you go to gordonresearch.com, you can watch CNN Health, because they can't afford to play this very often, because Sanjay Gupta made them spend 2 separate 1-hour specials proving to you how toxic America is. And if they play it very often, they'll have no advertisers. So I saved it for you on my website, because you really need to see what it says. And we know which states are toxic, and we all have heard by now that it wasn't just Bill Moyer that we tested. It was the 10 children that we took at random. One day in America, we took the babies and we saved the cord blood, and we gave a check for $15,000 apiece to laboratories to go beyond the $4,900 test you get at Mount Sinai School of Medicine, which is only for about 240 chemicals. So we went to about 330 chemicals. So these children, every one of them, are loaded. And of course, a month ago, they released the fact that so are the mothers. It's obvious. But the OB-GYNers sit there and they actually pretend that the placenta is going to protect the baby. It doesn't protect the baby. It concentrates in the baby. When we did the first expose of this toxicity with National Geographic, we pointed out that all the mother has to do is have enough babies, and the lead will leave her body as it starts to concentrate in the babies. So when you become an expert at this, you will understand that every bone of every person on the earth, according to Caltech, Claire Patterson, who's the world's authority on when the lead came into your environment, because he went to the Arctic and the Antarctic, and he drilled down and he tested the cores and found out that obviously the lead came in when we started the industrial age, and it went soaring when we started putting lead in gas. And now today you have a pretty simple situation. We burn electricity, and we do it by burning coal. And particularly China is putting out power plants every single week. They're opening a new power plant. We opened 1 new power plant in Texas, and the incidence of autism went up 14%. Now we have 50 a month being turned on. And it's clear front page news of New York Times that mercury and lead and cadmium is why you have to worry about the fish that you eat, and why we worry about every blade of grass at 10,000 foot elevation. The birds are loaded with mercury, and we can do radioisotope testing, and we can show that a lot of it was the Chinese coal. So now we even have new sources. We can worry about metal hip prosthesis actually going into the mother, giving the mother the metals like chromium that then can help build a toxic in the baby. But this is what we found out. We know there are all these chemicals. The problem is, what are you going to do about it? I don't go anywhere without my power drink. My power drink has the fiber and the C and things like maca and organic greens, and then I use zeolite. I don't believe that you can breathe air without getting toxic, because we showed in San Francisco, we've been able to prove that 30% of your total body mercury is a contribution from the particulates that you breathe when you're breathing the air in beautiful San Francisco, and it's the particulates from the burning of coal. So when we know this is going on, then it's to the point that if we're going to stay healthy and be a model for our patients, because I truly believe that we can overcome the problems we face, but it's going to take healthy people able to think our way out of the mess that we've painted ourselves into. But this is all known to you. 134 of the chemicals in the baby cause cancer. They cause birth defects. You know, it's, as they're saying now, we may have a shortage of males. Well, it's to the point today that so many of the babies come with the help of a fertility specialist. The old-fashioned way doesn't seem to work anymore. And so now, with autism being 1 out of 150, and I have been very successful working on autism patients, as well as Lyme patients, as well as lupus, because my fight concept kind of protects everybody. Food, infection, genetics, heavy metal hormone toxin. You can hardly go wrong. The problem is, who's got the money to test every one of those areas? Because we all have food sensitivities, that's important. We all need food supplements, so under F, I need to know, how much D do we really need? Do we all really need 5,000 a day? It gets a little complicated, and there's a lot to learn, but bottom line is a huge payoff, because if you can feel this good at age 76, I'm looking forward to 80. I think I'll feel much younger, because the knowledge that I have gained by sitting in meetings like this, and I go to a meeting every week for the last 10 years, which is why I have 3,000 health professionals now belonging to my free school of advanced medicine, because we share what we learn so we don't all have to travel and live in hotels. But the chemicals certainly are involved in this problem, and we do know that fruits and vegetables are useful, and Ralph Moss is a super source of information. He really in-depth analyzes, so you can tell your patient. If you don't know what to tell him, use Ralph as a consultant. He will tell you how little there is to support the standard mainstream medicine approach that your patient is being told to follow. And of course, it's not an even playing field. When they come to us, they have to pay cash. When they go down to the big medical center, it's all covered. But the difference is, in every case, I will show you in the stats, we beat and make much longer survival in patients who already have cancer. And of course, if you have somebody that comes from a family where everybody had breast cancer, then you should start early on getting them into cancer screening tests, because then it's simple. As soon as the cancer screening test is the least bit elevated, you simply tighten down their program in one of the areas, FIGHT. So we know that our diet is killing us, and it's great for the Time magazine is actually endorsing organic food, so it won't be so hard to sell that to our patients. This is the pages, and each page, whether it was eggs or milk or beef, they came to the verdict, they tested it all, and they endorsed the fact that it's worth it to get the organic. And we know we're getting far too many carbohydrates, and we know that the whole story of genetically modified foods and the problem of the high fructose corn syrup is helping kill people. There's nothing complicated about that. So it's nice that at least one judge tried to stop Monsanto a little bit, so that at the moment we may not have to have the genetically modified beets, but it looks like they're certainly going to try to give us genetically modified salmon. And when you see the work of Jeffrey Smith and you study on my website, you will understand why I won't go a day without taking a probiotic, because no matter where I travel, I'm not going to be able to avoid genetically modified, which means you're getting Bacillus thuringiensis, which means that you have a pesticide in your intestine, which means you don't have optimal intestinal flora. That's very simple. There's a reason that we're all having leaky gut, many reasons. So the big idea that you can cut cancer by 80%, Paul Ewald, he wrote the book about the infections. And if you go to all the meetings that I do on infection, you'll be talking not just candida, but chlamydia, and that Harvard says 80 to 90% of us have cytomegalic virus at all time, and then you'll get into the new AIDS, XMRV. So these infections are a major problem, and there is a viral cause for prostate cancer, and that has been increasingly being sold with the XM. This is the murine leukemia-related virus, and this is truly a new epidemic. But it gets to the point, can your patients afford to be tested for every possible infection for $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, and then test for all the food sensitivities for $1,000, and then start to get into genetic? I mean, we can bankrupt the system. So what I try to do is I try to come up with a simple program that you have something that works for the F and the I and the G and the H and the T, like silver is going to help on the infections. If it doesn't help enough, we always can teach oxidative medicine and use things like intravenous ozone and ultraviolet blood therapy, which we are allowed to do in states like Nevada and Arizona, where we have homeopathic boards that tolerate all of the new medicine that I practice and preach. But the XMRV is truly a problem, and it's tied to chronic fatigue, and silver is truly a major, major answer to these problems. We have the interaction of silver with HIV, so the more you learn about silver, once you become fully convinced that it's totally safe, then your only other remaining question is, how effective is it? And obviously that will be subject to competitive testing against various products, because there are laboratories, as I have chosen to use one that was developed in Provo, Utah, and at Brigham Young University, Dr. Robinson, the director of microbiology, has a level 2 research laboratory for the US government, and he has everything in there from prions to Ebola. He has all the nasty stuff, and he has found that there are silvers that will handle every one of those infections, including Lyme. So as we get into this problem of infections, there are answers. The big problem becomes when I really brought out the idea that I could put enough EDTA into a packet of tablets and add to it something in the ocean that would act like heparin, and I could alter the hypercoagulable nature of a poisoned population, because the more infection you have, the more inflammation, the thicker the blood. And of course, until we became aware of the need for omega-3, we had other confounding factors setting the stage for these sudden death situations. But most people who die of a heart attack or a stroke actually are dying of a clot. And so if you talk to the world's top expert, Roger Bick, who I had speaking on my program, he's the director, University of Texas, MD, PhD pathologist, and his whole life was blood clotting. The textbooks are very large. And you find that Leiden 5 is just the tip of the iceberg. There's so many genetic things that set the stage for us to be hypercoagulable, not just the smoking, not just the stress we're under. So I'm fighting back continuously by thinning the blood with natural approaches that essentially I found a heparin in the ocean, and that heparin, being a sulfated mucopolysaccharide in the presence of EDTA, meant that I don't have my patients ever calling. I don't get a phone call in 20 years, no one calls, that they have had a heart attack and dad's dead or mom's had a fatal stroke, and I cancel bypass on everybody, and I do no stenting. But I can do that because as the co-founder of ACAM, I wrote the protocol for the chelation that's been used around the world, and we're in the middle of a $29 million study funded by NIH called the Trial to Assess Chelation Therapy, and they're using my old IV protocol. My new IV protocol is a simple 5-minute protocol using calcium EDTA that's painless, gets much more lead out than the 3-hour chelation that I wrote when I first wrote the protocol that's treated 10 million people. But now I've moved on to oral, because oral I have on my website 507 published papers that you couldn't work in the lead field and have a lead battery as your plant, as your client, and not use oral EDTA, because people can't work with lead without doing something to take it out. But there's a myth that oral EDTA doesn't work, and of course that's a complete lie, or there wouldn't be 507 published papers on my website. So when we look at it, I have moved into zeolite, because zeolite can do some things that I can't do with oral chelation. And obviously there's no single chelator that takes care of everything, and now we're more concerned in a sense, and once you move beyond the fact that you're born with 1,000 times too much lead in your bone. Harvard Medical School has demonstrated and published in the Journal of the AMA that the level of lead in your bone, which they detect non-invasively with a $500,000 detector they have, that determines how soon you're going to go blind with your cataract. And all causes of morbidity and mortality are tied to how low your lead is. And since even intravenous chelation can't move the lead out of your bone, and your bone remodels over 15 years, I just take each day my power drink and each day my oral chelator and my zeolite, because I know that I can prevent more lead from being deposited in my bones, so that over time I can have a clean, healthy bone, and it won't have to snap the way so many bones do, because they are not remodeling themselves well when they carry so much lead in them. And that's the source, and it's just the same way when you learn about mercury and cadmium, which we had a wonderful presentation by Dr. Houston, and he's really tried to teach everybody what is going on. How are these metals giving us cardiovascular disease? And so I just jumped to the bottom line conclusion. Since the Archives of Internal Medicine publishes the paper that all causes of morbidity and mortality are tied to how low your lead is, and everybody has lead above safe levels, I repeat, 400 years ago they were about 1/1000th the level they are today. And since that bone is in equilibrium with your tissues, I can make you feel good with 50 or 100 chelation. I took 200 IV chelation. That's what opened my eyes. Just the same way when I came to the last conference in Las Vegas and I got a treatment on a PEMF device that you had in your exhibit hall, it changed my life again, because I'd been walking around to the point I could hardly stand straight. My back was killing me for 20 years, and using PEMF daily for 2 months, I'm a new man, and it is so nice to stand straight because there's no more pain. So when we learn how to put all of these things together, we can help our patients cost effectively. The lady last night has no health insurance. She needed a miracle. We gave her a miracle with a single treatment of PEMF to that shoulder, which has been killing her for a couple of months. So if we look at zeolite, zeolite can help us get rid of toxins. And this is the Sloan Kettering website telling you that it's not used for just diarrhea. It's being used heavily in Europe for the treatment of cancer. And there's many different kinds of zeolite, and I put up a website called zeoliteanswer.com with several hundred papers because there's always more to learn. What's the good? What's the bad? Where does it come from? Why does it work? How can you optimize it, and these kind of things. But if we look at it, we know that it will reduce cancer risk. It's an antioxidant. It will nullify nitrosamines in the digestive tract. In fact, if you own a hog farm or chicken farm, there'll be no smell of that terrible ammonia smell because it totally neutralizes it and converts it to useful protein, and the animals will have a net gain of some 24% improved muscle production when they are maintained on zeolite. So of course I have my horses on zeolite, and then it's going to chelate and remove heavy metals and support a healthy immune system. So if you're a farmer, you just don't want to have malformed little chickens or malformed little beef come out. So the enlightened are using zeolite. Now we know we're losing the war on cancer, and there's a reason for it. It's how much money is involved. And this is one of the Mayo Clinic doctors, Mortel, just making fun of the oncologist, how much money they make when they give it intravenously in the office, even if it's off-label. They attacked me when I started ACAM some 38 years ago because I was using EDTA and non-FDA approved. It was approved for the emergency treatment of hypercalcemia, and it was only approved for the use in treating lead poisoning. It was never approved to improve the blood flow to your leg, but I found out that I definitely could save gangrenous extremities, and I could bring memories back on people, so I fought with them, and we formed ACAM, and we've spent, some 38 years in that fight. But since that fight is never going to be a clean win because there's so much vested interest telling people that chelation, and chelation alone is not the answer, it's just a tool in my FIGHT. If you're going to believe in food, and you got to get people off the food they're sensitive to and give them the food supplements, and every one of us have in our plaque, there's CMV according to Harvard, so you're going to have to use some silver. You're going to have to do something about genetics. And the genetics is a big piece of the puzzle because these things like bisphenol A are changing our methylation ability, which is why you need methylated folic acid, and then you won't see a slide telling you that folic acid is dangerous. There's a lot more to learn, and we share all that with people in my FACT group where we share protocols and how to treat breast cancer and prostate cancer. But this whole cancer chemotherapy, there is so much money in that game. And so the net result is that if you look at Gina Colada, she's just saying we're not winning the war. She, at New York Times, finally just says it's a joy. You're not winning the war on cancer, you guys. And so now we have drugs that are costing $93,000 a year that let you live 16 weeks longer. Are you getting any significant quality of life while you're bankrupting the patient or the nation? I mean, it's really outrageous, and now they want $800,000 for the lung cancer. This is, the whole thing is out of control. And because that stuff is all subsidized, the poor patient sits there and they know it's not the greatest treatment, but they're afraid, and the doctor tells them, whatever you do, don't take vitamin C. They tell them as you leave the office, whatever you do, don't take vitamin C. Why do they do that? They're full of hot air. Vitamin C, used as I teach at ACAM when up comes the oxidative workshop that Dr. Rowe and I will be teaching. When you use high-dose vitamin C, you are using it as an oxidant, the same as chemo or radiation. And you'll see that there's some pretty good evidence that we're on a good run with that stuff. But across the board, you need to know that these Avastin drugs are staggeringly expensive, and it's nonsense. And when you go back to reading the data on the slide about the Johnson & Johnson test, they suggest that you may want to repeat your test 2 days after you've had your stupid chemo. And if there's not less cancer in your bloodstream, you may want to go to a different drug or a different doctor. That's going to change the whole playing field. We're going to have people, instead of 12 million people walking around now with a lie by the surgeon saying, I think I got it all, you can't get it all. It's a systemic disease. No matter how much breast you cut off, you haven't changed the game. And so when we look at these facts, it becomes, does radiation do anything? Well, you'll see that now we have proof that you can use a tamoxifen and get the same results that you did with radiation. You never needed the radiation, which was doing a negative and spending needless money and tying up people's time. So it does not improve. So the mammograms, they're a ripoff. When I was in radiology at Mount Zion in 1965, when they brought in the first thermograph, the guy said, throw it out. Our income is dependent. We need the money from the mammogram, so we don't want thermography. And now we have people being told they have disseminated ductal carcinoma, which is really a precancer, and they're still cutting their breasts off. And now you have an expose showing that 90,000 women who told they had to have their breast removed didn't even have the disease in the first place. So there's a lot you need to know. In thermography, which I bought the first thermograph camera in my office some 35 years ago for $56,000, but it changed my life. Because I can take a picture of your face, and if it's cold here and warm there, there's a blockage in this system, and you're going to have a stroke at some point. This is real easy. If I take a picture of your leg and your foot is 70 degrees, it might be that you should have a little bit of treatment for your peripheral artery disease. So I love thermography, and if there is a suspicious hot spot on the breast, that's a good time to start to do some of the blood tests. We have blood tests in our country. The $500 panel that I use in Tokyo, I haven't been able to duplicate in this country, even though I brought Dr. Kobayashi to this country, to Emory University. I've taken him to Paris. It involves in about $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 worth of new equipment that most labs don't have to be able to get the reproducibility of the tests that I will show you. So we know that CAT scans are now being seen as not being so safe. And National Cancer Institute says that maybe the CAT scan's killing about 29,000 additional people, so all this stuff we're doing isn't so safe. This is what a tumor in the breast looks like. Prostate-specific antigen, in spite of all the fight, whether how good or how bad, it depends on how it's used. Now, the leading centers are telling people some honesty is in the system now. I listen to Dr. Radio, NYU Medical Center, Sirius Satellite 114. They tell people, we're going to do watchful waiting. They're not going to go and take that whole prostate out and radiate the bejesus out of it, because they're going to sit there and say, well, let's see what happens over time. Now, if I have any test that's abnormal, whether it's a test for prostatitis, which it may well be better for that, it's just a sign of unhealth. And any test that you do on your patient that shows unhealth gives an area for you to put the patient on a program that improves the outcome. And that's what our kind of medicine is all about. Now, the epigenetic story, this is where it becomes unbelievable to understand that when we simply warmed the food we gave to the mice in a plastic container that had bisphenol A as the hardener, and we put that food in the mouse overnight, all those mice offspring became diabetic, obese, and became, instead of brown, they became yellow. This has been a subject called Ghost in Your Genes, shown by NOVA, and it kind of proves the fact that these little things that we are talking about are adversely affecting us. You can overcome that methylation defect that you induce when you have the water in the hardened plastic bottles. I've gotten to the point that since 40% of the water companies won't admit that they've done anything other than just put tap water in the bottle, and by putting it in the bottle, they've added phthalates and bisphenol A to my toxic burden. I'm back to drinking the water out of the pipe. Anyhow, when you begin to see selective cell death is mediated by small conditional, this article from the Proceeding of the National Academy of Science, this will tell you that there isn't any cancer that we couldn't completely cure. This is a powerful slide. You'll have to look at it later. We don't have time to go into it in any detail, but you need to know that it is like a Trojan horse. It goes in the cell, and if there's a cancer there, it changes, and it then brings in the bomber and kills the cancer. It's a pretty exciting story. Jeff Bland is doing a wonderful job, and the IFM has been really, a large number of doctors are now starting to think out of the box, because the patients, 70% of them already are doing ancillary things. They're not buying into this chemoradiation surgery, but Dr. Kobayashi is the man that he's an MD, PhD, molecular biologist, and Bruce Lipton wrote the book Biology of Belief. And this book, and so molecular biology is an important background. It almost makes you start to study quantum mechanics, as I'm starting to study. But with that background, he then became his MD, then he became a pathologist, then he became an oncologist. So that's why we have 10,000 people, because he got the Sun Moon Church to get their church members to agree to spend $500 each year and see him and have these tests done. And did they work? Well, 20,000 early stage patients, dramatic. Anyhow, you can read the slides. It's very powerful that he's been able to show that holistic treatment will, even after they're in the last stage, and it's all true. We do far better. But it's fun when you catch them before the lump bump stage. And of course, you will see that the lump bump stage takes 7 years when you read these slides, which fortunately will be in your possession. And every lecture I give is also a webinar on my website. And there's about 15 webinars with an hour on food, an hour on infection, an hour on genetics, an hour on vitamin C and cancer, where you can learn all these, an hour on what I've learned about pulsed electromagnetic field therapy. So if you begin to get an idea, these are the tests that are in his panel, the Kobayashi panel, and he is anal retentive and slightly compulsive, and the net result is that these tests all have to be reproducible plus or minus 5%, which is why most labs in this country aren't anxious to get into this business, because Kobayashi is a slave driver. He really makes that laboratory turn out the results that he wants. But this way, he can see that if there's a little bit of elevation of your ferritin, that all of a sudden a small perturbation in CEA starts to move you right into stage 5, which is preclinical cancer. And at this point, the patient is either going to do nothing, go on smoking, not change their diet, not get any more sleep, not do any far infrared saunas, not do any, they're going to develop the cancer. Or in every case, the Japanese are quite compliant. They're great patients. That's why I've spent 8 years traveling back and forth to Japan to teach alternative cancer therapies, because they really are great people to work with. So the risk assessment by this tumor marker, and so all of these things allows you to change people's what they're doing. Now, there's a profile that we do in our country, and it's right in Hollywood, Florida. It's called American Metabolic Testing. It's just caprofile.net. This test is about $370, and it does these things like 3 ways of doing HCG. Now, you can't trust even a clinic like Mayo Clinic. I recently had a suspicious thermogram, and I wanted to get the patient to be not worried, and we wound up, but it was a pretty suspicious thermogram. And I used the Mayo, and they said HCG is all normal. I said, well, I'm still not comfortable, so I used a real lab that really knows how to do these tests. And it came back distinctly elevated, and we distinctly did find a cancer was present. No big problem. I'm not afraid to treat cancer, because at least I now have a chance, because we were catching it very early. But phosphohexoisomerase is a test that he has incorporated, that the Japanese have flown over to learn how he's been smart enough to incorporate that, because by the time he does this panel, you've got a real handle. But there's another test out there, and that is called, this is simply called U-Test U, and this test is got extremely high reproducibility on liver, and not so great. In fact, it's so weak on prostate that they throw in a PSA because they know their test is not great. Now, Cancer Treatment Centers of America, Dick Stevenson started it 30 years ago. He's a friend of mine. And so this is just his data showing that if you compare their survival in any of these cancers at the end of, say, 3.5 years on, say, advanced breast cancer, if you're with standard therapy, you're going to have 29% survival. With him, he's been able to get 42%. So they really brought some naturopaths in, and they really incorporate nutrition into the program. And it's the kind of the same way on advanced prostate. Again, 29% at the end of a 4-year survival with standard, and they're at 49%. So early palliative care, this is an important part of the lecture. The people on Dr. Radio at NYU really point out that sometimes we will have to admit that we're not going to help. And then our job becomes to know how to talk about the end of life, just the way a lot of us have trouble talking to our patient about how to pay for their services that keep us alive so we can be in conferences and so that we can be of service to our patients. You have to charge for your time. And this is another subject. You need to learn how to know when to be the patient's best friend and be there for them, if all you're going to do is maintain a quality of life instead of this last-ditch effort. Look at how much of the money we spend in the last 2 years of life. More than 2/3 of the money that people spend on their health care for their whole life is dumped into some fruitless nonsense. in the last year or two of life. So nutraceutical use in late stage, we know that it's being increasingly being employed, and you've got all these things. Vitamin K, what can it do? Garlic, all of these things. I mean, one of the reasons that I had to use the old chelation with the 3-hour treatment was because of the calcium content in your vascular system. Your aorta goes for 140 times more calcified at age 80 than it was at age 10. So obviously when I had the early chelation, the 3-hour, I used disodium, which hurts, and it lowers your serum calcium, so you triple your parathyroid, so that mobilizes the calcium in your arteries. Now I have vitamin K2. That's why I've switched in virtually entirely to either a 3 or 5 minute use of calcium EDTA and the use of oral chelation. But garlic is incredible. It's a key part of what I do in my oral program that I call Oral Beyond Chelation. But pomegranates have got good research. The polyphenols, there's lots of things. Green tea, omega-3 fatty acids, pistachios, broccoli. There are so many things that the research is overwhelming. At a meeting I attended of the Oxygen Club of California, which is put on by Bruce Ames and and a couple of his colleagues, and at this conference, Dr. Bharat Agarwal, who's one of the experts at MD Anderson in the Department of Experimental Therapeutics, shows that if you really studied curcumin, you would never treat any cancer patient or anybody with inflammation without learning a lot about curcumin. There's so much that is not talked about because it's not patentable. And so I think the way Dr. Wright characterizes, he calls all those drugs patent medicine to try to put them in the category they belong. Because obviously all of you in this room know things that are better than the drugs that are being pushed, but the drugs are only in the pipeline because it costs $1 billion to get something approved, and so it's patented. And so when you show them what vitamin C can do, there's nobody that cares. In fact, NIH studies know that there was no cancer that we couldn't see and induce into apoptosis. Every form of cancer, when you put the vitamin C high enough. So I worked hard and made a form of vitamin C that you could take and tolerate in high levels without tearing up your guts, because Linus Pauling was my friend. He was one of my mentors, as was Roger Williams and Dr. Shuraskin. I was lucky to meet all of these greats, and they all influenced my practice dramatically. John Miller was the first man to put minerals in a supplement in the history of the world. He was the inventor of chelated minerals, and it was his work that led me to be the first guinea pig to have a hair test done, and then later to be the director of the largest lab, which I later sold to Doctors Data. But I really do know trace minerals, having had offices in both Tokyo, Amsterdam, Boston, and San Francisco, and have done a couple of 100,000 people's trace element testing on blood, urine, hair. I kind of know a little bit about it, but I want to make sure that you stay friendly to curcumin. It's a great story. But vitamin K3. K3 has nothing to do with K2 or K1. And K3 appears to be able to enhance the oxidative effect that I want when I'm going to high-dose vitamin C. So we can even do it orally. It's been the subject. Life Extension Magazine has really gone heavy into it, and I'll be teaching this at the workshop on oxidative therapies in mid-April in Minneapolis, when we have the first combined meeting of ACAM as well as the Integrative Medicine Society and the Holistic Society and the Environmental Society. So the K3 is a great story. Vitamins versus chemotherapy. Dr. Abraham Hoffer. Dr. Hoffer was the first guy to do real studies on orthomolecular medicine, MD, PhD. He passed away recently at about 93 years of age, sharp as a tack to the end, my great mentor and great friend. And in his books on how to treat cancer, he has simple things that actually have been terribly beneficial. High-dose C for cancer patients. I have a whole webinar on my website, how it works. Vitamin C slows tumor growth. That's right out of NIH, you noticed. This is from the United States Department of Health. High doses administered can fight cancer in the laboratory, the researchers report. So this is all real. And so pharmacologic ascorbic acid selectively kill cancer cells. And this, again, is coming from Mark Levine at NIH. He's spoken at ACAM twice. And the effects of pharmacological things on cancer cells is well documented. We had a miracle occur to wake people up to what is happening to your loved ones. This is a story of a man in New Zealand who was unconscious for 20 days. after his flu went into pneumonia, and they had him fully intubated, unconscious, in coma. And after 20 days, the doctors came to the family and said, time to pull the plug on Daddy. And the 4 strapping sons were not afraid of that hospital, and they suggested that we don't pull the plug until Daddy's had IV vitamin C. Daddy is now driving the tractor. It's all on my website. Watch it. It was covered by CBS 60 Minutes down in New Zealand. So we know that there's adverse drug reactions. You know that if you're going to read 1,200 references on curing the incurable, you need to understand it's only done with high-dose C. So you need to see that you can prove is getting high dose. So we now have a stick test, and every one of your patients in the office, 14% of your patients have scurvy. They don't have any detectable C in the urine. If you keep them here, they have a bright future. Yellow ties to bright future. That's what we do at the cancer clinic with Dr. Hugh Reardon in Wichita. That's how we're treating cancer. Is our healthcare the best in the world? We all know it's not. Medical mistakes are killing 100,000 people. There's a lot of stuff you need to know about estrogen receptors. It's a great story. Selective estrogen receptor modulators is what I teach. And I have brought from northern Thailand a Pararia mirifica that we have renamed herbal remedy from Thailand. HRT is what I call it, HRT. But what it does is it is the lowest incidence of breast cancer in the world, and it stops the bone loss and the vaginal dryness and the depression and the insomnia, because there are estrogen receptors throughout our whole body, but you want to know the difference between alpha and beta receptors. The beta is the one we want. 10 tips to reduce breast cancer risk. There is also a new sleep formula that we call PM that's based on Chinese medicine Cordialis, and this happens to also be a aromatase inhibitor, which is very exciting because now you can actually take 7 out of 10 people off their Ambien or the Lunesta safely, because those drugs are frying people's brains. So there are natural answers. The soy story is complicated, and we need to have you understand that all involves estrogen receptors. Dr. Christiane Northrup's book talks all about what the Pararia mirifica, which I call HRT, which is available to anybody, and there is an easy way without having to do any kind of testing to put any woman on something, and I as a man take it because I have estrogen receptors in my prostate as well as my brain. So anyhow, there's a lot more to learn, because you would not think I would be taking something that replaces the need for estradiol in my women patients, but it's healthy for me to take. But you can learn more about that. Pararia mirifica is a big study. The dramatic successes we have, we all need more vitamin D. The vitamin D is a major epidemic, and we need to get into understanding that we can prove that these alternative treatments are always, whatever you look at, this is the standard survival, and this is the survival with alternatives. So standard survival, breast 32, here we're 75. Standard survival with colorectal 13, here we're 42. And so across the board, I'm pretty confident that we're onto something. Wobenzyme, I've worked with Carl Ransberger, who developed Wobenzyme. We have $50 million of the research in this one book. But of course, our FDA wouldn't let you have that book in this country. You've got to go over to Germany. We'll be glad to give you as many copies as you want. PEMF is what I learned at the last conference here, and it has changed my life, and the attributes are, it's pretty exciting, and I've got a handout on the front thing and over by the water that will let you know how to join and be part of my 3,000 School of Advanced Medicine, and the literature is there on pulsed electromagnetic field. Thank you very much. Thank you.
That's a lot of information in a short period of time.
Simplifying the diet and getting off the foods we're allergic to. I put all of that into an acronym called Fight for Your Health. And my website, which has about 10,000 pages, and then there's, beyond my website, there's the private membership website called FACT, which I'll have all of you pick up a piece of paper to learn how to join at no cost. So you can learn what your colleagues around the world are doing with cancer or heart disease or autism or Alzheimer's, because there's exciting things going on. But as we will see from this slide, we can take and have the ability, I'm going to have to get my pointer because I'm not seeing which of these is the right button for the pointer. I would like to point out that in a magnetic field, things like frequencies and everything turns out to be a frequency. When you get into the field of quantum mechanics, you'll start to be able to understand this sentence here, that homeopathic remedies are frequencies, because everything really does work on a string theory. So when you move into string theory, when you move into this new field of thinking, you can really have a much more powerful effect when you're treating with homeopathics or even with a laser, because the major benefit is in a magnetic field. The laser is going to virtually go through. So last night, we at the booth 211, where I learned at the last conference of IFIM about pulsed electromagnetic field therapy, we took a lady that was walking by that was in total, because I see it as the next challenge. So when we move into this field of cancer, the exciting news is that you will be able to learn that Dr. Kobayashi taught us how in Tokyo to follow 10,000 patients 10 years using a blood test that told you how much cancer you have. And this is all on my website, Gordon Research, and when I'm done speaking, I'll have all of you join at no charge my School of Advanced Medicine with 3,000 other of our colleagues, where I teach you these little tricks. I want to make sure that I get you to understand there's a reason that we're all sitting here not feeling as good as we could, because the Earth's magnetic field is collapsing, according to NASA. And when you have the researchers telling you that about 250 million years ago, when we had the dinosaurs really doing pretty well, we had about 30 Gauss. Today, the experts tell you that most of the Earth contains only about 0.3 Gauss. And of course, at zero, you'll be like Mars, you'll be a dead planet. So we have a new thing to add to our consciousness, since I have spent so much time learning what nutrients to take in and how to get the bad stuff out. And Dr. Kobayashi showed us that we didn't need a drug to keep people cancer-free. What we needed was to have people motivated sufficiently so that they would do the simple things that all of you really talk about: daily detoxification, adding far-infrared saunas when you need to, getting immune support, lowering stress, adding exercise, and the physics of health means that we'll have to go back and look at what does electricity do, what does magnetism do, how important is pH? Or when you put magnetism into the body, you raise ATP and you make the cells alkaline again, so they operate much more efficiently. And so there's a lot to these new findings that we don't get grounded anymore. We don't walk on the wet grass and change things. And there is going to be more and more interest, because now we have even PubMed showing that prolonged weakening of the geomagnetic field is directly leading to changes in our body and delaying the ability of our thymus to mature, and also lowering the effectiveness of the immune system. So it's really fascinating to find that the geomagnetic field that we operate on is terribly important about the release of macrophage nitric oxide. So all of the things that we learn at our conferences, we now have to add physics to our consciousness. So you've all heard today about the problem of environmental cancer risk, and we know this is real, and we know these chemicals are in everybody, and we know about where they're coming from, and we know government can't change it. It's too big a problem, so we're going to have to protect ourselves and our patients. So we have this ridiculous nonsense going on that people are being told erroneous information. The people that we treated in the study in Tokyo, many of them had familial gastric carcinoma, and they carried the gene for it, and we didn't have to take the stomach out. This is all nonsense, that because you're in pain for several months, she's been unable to use her right shoulder, and in one treatment simply had her sitting there with a big happy smile on her face with that shoulder back. And she's been a massage therapist, and she's tried everything, and she's talked to many people. So there's something going on when we learn about this magnetism. And so the Earth's magnetosphere, the big question is, right now, you have the privilege of living on Earth at a time of Earth changes. And it appears that it's very likely that About 730 million years ago, the South Pole was the North Pole. And right now, we find that there's some interesting changes going on, and the magnetism is really important in protecting the Earth, but it's the only way you can raise ATP levels in every cell in your body so that all of our nutrients can work and our cells can push out these toxins that we all agree we're loaded with. Now, you've been hearing a lot about dead birds falling to the ground. And we know that they all navigate by magnetism. And there's been some changes going so that in Tampa they had to renumber the runway because the North Pole has moved about 60 miles. And that's because we're going through a time of change. And no one's suggesting that the North Pole will be South Pole in your or my lifetime. But it's very clear when NASA tells you that the collapse of the Earth's electromagnetic field is one of the things that we're facing, then we have to plug that in. My friend Dr. Sinatra is making people aware of the physics of health.
I would like to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Garry Gordon.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. I feel fantastic, and I want all of you to feel as good as I do at age 76. It is a miracle that we live in a time that I could have been born with many, many health problems, running high fevers, stuttering, cross-eyed, unable to be coordinated, unable to participate in sports, heart problems, total lack of stomach acid. I had the lowest levels of magnesium tested on humans, so I had the highest levels of mercury in air, so I had a few problems. And at age 76, to feel fantastic is what I want to help all of you do. Now, my title of my talk today, Stemming the Tide of Cancer, I've had such wonderful success in treating heart disease since my heart failed at age 29 that I really have gotten kind of bored with heart disease since I developed the concept that you could find the right supplements to take, and I call it oral chelation, but it's much more complicated. We spent about $10 million figuring out EDTA can make heparin work by mouth, so I stopped the clots that kill people. So since heart disease became kind of easy to treat, and Dr. Sinatra, my friend with metabolic cardiology, we've been able to even cancel heart transplants, even on children, I kind of decided to move into the cancer field.